A pleasant morning, dear students. This is your subject, DISS, or Disciplines and Ideas in the Social Sciences, Quarter 2, Week 6. Again, this is Rafi Aguilar, your teacher. Before we begin, don't forget to visit our official website at GAITF.sims.school/LCMS. I repeat, GAITF.sims.school/LCMS. Visit our learning path, download the PDF files there, and of course, don't forget to answer the activities and the quizzes I have uploaded there. Today we have a new lesson. So the question is, are you guys ready for our new lesson? I guess everyone is ready. So now let's begin. Sikolohiyang Filipino, Philippine psychological thought, orientation of threats and contents. So do you have any idea about this? If not, then we'll find out on the next few slides. Before we begin, of course, I have prepared our objectives for this morning. So this will be our objectives. First, to know more about the Sikolohiyang Filipino or Philippine psychological thought. Second, identify the historical trends of Philippine psychological thought. And last but not least, give importance about the Philippine psychological thought. So this will be the three objectives that we are going to obtain at the end of the lesson or at the end of the discussion. So we are going to know more about identify and of course to give importance. So, do you have any questions? If not, then we'll proceed. Sikolohiyang Filipino, Philippine psychological thought, orientation of threats and context. Filipino psychology or Sikolohiyang Filipino is defined as the psychology rooted in the experience, ideas, and cultural orientation of the Filipinos. It was formalized in 1975 by the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Filipino or National Association for Filipino Psychology under the leadership of Virgilio Enriquez, also known as the father of Filipino psychology. So, who is the father of Filipino psychology? It's Virgilio Enriquez. So, the National Association for Filipino Psychology or the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Filipino. So, under leadership of Virgilio Enriquez. So, who is Virgilio Enriquez? So, the picture shown on the screen is Virgilio G. Enriquez himself. So, that's him. Filipino psychology in the Philippines. Filipino psychology in the Philippines exists and grows as part of the nationalist indigenization movement in the Philippines. Its roots can be traced back to the introduction of the American education system in the Philippines. Agustin Alonso was among the first Filipino psychologists to return from their education in America on the year 1925 and taught at the College of Education at the University of the Philippines. So, who is an American? The first Filipino psychologist who returned from their education in America in the year 1925. So, it was Agustin Alonso. So, because of the American education system in the Philippines. Yes, so the Filipino psychologists in the Philippines exist and grows as part of the nationalist indigenization movement in the Philippines. So, where did it begin? Okay, so it traced back to the introduction of the American education system in the Philippines. So, who was the first psychologist who returned their education in America? So, it was Agustin Alonso. So, that was in the year 1925. and it was taught at the College of Education of the at the University of the Philippines, UP. His team brought with them psychological knowledge rooted in the American tradition of psychology. So this Western psychology is taught in schools as universal and scientific, despite generally considered by some as insensitive and inappropriate to Philippine culture. By the way, before we proceed, what do you mean by psychology? Do you have any idea about this word psychology? So psychology, it is the study of the human state of mind as well as the behavior of the human and the animals. So that is psychology. It has something to do with our mind, how we act or how we behave. So that's the main focus of psychology. It's a state of mind. So this hegemony, political, economic, or military predominance or control of one state over others is referred to as colonial psychology. In the 1960s, other Filipino intellectuals and scholars were already aware of the limitations and incompatibility of Western psychology. These Western-oriented approaches in search and led scholars to paint the Filipino through the judgment and impressionistic use of the colonizers. So it is with the use of these American categories and standards that the native Filipinos suffer from the American comparison in subtle expressions to put forward Western behavior patterns as a model for us. So that was in the year 1960s. No? Other Filipino intellectuals and scholars were already aware of the limitation and incompatibility of Western psychology. There were also early efforts to connect the traditional way of teaching and studying psychology in 1960, which includes the translation of foreign materials and the use of Filipino language as a mode of instruction. These efforts failed to address the problems brought about by the colonial and Filipino psychology because of non-collaboration of psychologists. In the 1970s, during the chaotic time of Ferdinand Marcos' regime, nationalist and radical sentiments among scholars had allowed colonial and Filipino psychology to merge. So that was in the year 1970s. So the chaotic time of Ferdinand Marcos' regime. Filipino psychology, along with the advances in Filipinology and histories, Pantayong Pananaw was led by Virgilio Enriquez, Prospero Cobar, and Zus Salazar in the indigenization movement of their respective fields. When Zus Salazar returned to the Philippines after his training in Paris, he joined the UP Faculty Department of History, where he taught for 30 years using Filipino as the medium of instruction from the very start of his teaching career in the year 1969, following the traditional adopted by his mentor Guadalupe Flores Gazon in 1965. So, what is the language or used as a medium of instruction? If when Zus Salazar joined the UP Faculty Department of History, where he taught for 30 years. So, Filipino as the medium of instruction from the very start of his teaching career in the year 1969, and then following the traditional adopted by his mentor Guadalupe Flores Gazon in the year 1965. This gave way to the existence of the Pantayong Pananaw, and its seed was already sown in Salazar's published essay in the year 1970 entitled ang pagtuturo ng kasaysayan sa Filipino. That's why if you are wondering why Oraling Panlipunan, the medium of instruction used there is Filipino. Okay, so I think it has something to do with the essay of Salazar's, no? That was published on the year 1917, which is entitled Ang Pagtuturo ng Kasaysayan sa Filipino. So, kasaysayan, that is history. Yeah. He insisted on the use of Filipino and emerged as one of the main figures in the indigenization movement in UP Diliman. He worked closely with like-minded scholars such as Prospero Covar, father of Filipinolohiya, Virgilio Enriquez, father of Sikolohiyang Filipino, and Leonardo Mercado, the last being a leading proponent of Filipino philosophy. So they have their own title, no? Their own title. So Prospero Covar, the father of Filipinolohiya. So Filipinology. That's yeah. And then Virgilio Enriquez as the father of Sikolohiyang Filipino, or the psychology Filipino. And of course, Leonardo Mercado, the last being a leading proponent, no? The proponent of Filipino philosophy. So each of them has their own title, no? Prospero Covar, the father of Filipinolohiya, Virgilio Enriquez, the father of Sikolohiyang Filipino, and Leonardo Mercado, the proponent or the leading proponent of Filipino philosophy. So it's about Filipinology, Filipino psychology, and of course the Filipino philosophy. That's why it's Filipino psychological thought. So again, the image shown on the screen is Virgilio Enriquez. So again, who is Virgilio Enriquez? Virgilio G. Enriquez was born on November 24th on the year 1942 at Santol, Balagtas, formerly Bigaa, Bulacan. He is the founder of the Pambansang Samahan sa Sikolohiyang Filipino, or the National Association for Sikolohiyang Filipino Incorporated. So he is the founder or the father, no? Okay, so that's the end of our discussion for this morning. I hope that you learned something from today. And of course, I remind you students to visit our official website, GAITF, that seems that school/LCMS. Visit our learning path, download the PDF files there, and don't forget to answer the activities and quizzes I have uploaded there. So again, that's all for today. Thank you for having your time with me, and I hope you've learned something from me. This is Rafi G. Aguilar, and wishing you all a good and a healthy day. Thank you everyone. God bless and stay safe.